And with the first pick in the draft, Mel Kiper has the Carolina Panthers selecting C.J. Stroud. He writes, the Panthers went big right before free agency, sending a bevy of picks and wide receiver DJ Moore to Chicago for the number 1 selection. It's a lot to give up, but the trade gives the Panthers their choice of quarterbacks in the class, which they're still working through. If they hit on that passer, they could have a 15-year starter. He writes that he's leaning towards Stroud based on what he's hearing. Important to note, because I believe Mel has Bryce Young as his number 1 quarterback because Bryce Young weighed over 200 pounds at his combine, Cody.
Mel lied. He still has Levis as his number 1 quarterback.
He lied? Did people die? Because Mel lied?
No.
Wasn't that a political line or something?
Is that what that's from?
Yeah, right?
It's from a Mel Kiper mock draft?
No.
He got one wrong, so people lost their lives?
Yeah, Mel still has, from the consensus, from his rankings of the position, he still has Levis number 1.
He lied. He said if Bryce Young weighs 200 pounds or more, he'd put him number 1.
Well, Mel Kiper gave out 3 different numbers of what Bryce Young's weight had to be for him to move up to number 1 on his board. At one point, he said 195. At one point, he said 200. And then at one point, he said 205. So I guess Bryce Young only checked 2 of those boxes because he came in at 204. So I guess he didn't fully pass the Mel Kiper Jr. test. And now somebody has to die, according to Jake.
Todd. He wasn't 205.
205.
I am disgusted right now. I don't even want to do this segment. Mel Kiper, you lied.
Rip up Kiper's mock. Let's pull up another one.
Andrew, is Lance Zerline here? Go run down the hall and see if we get him in here for a segment. I don't even want to talk about Mel's mock anymore. Awful.
Yeah, Kiper lied. He's still got Levis number 1.
Unbelievable. All right, well.
Based on what he's hearing, though, Stroud is the pick for Carolina.
Stroud's the Vegas favorite, so okay, Stroud number 1. Now at 2, Bryce Young is the pick by the Houston Texans. Originally, you might recall we did this segment a couple weeks ago, and Mel Kiper projected a Houston trade up to number 1 in his previous mock. But that's not going to happen now. We know that. So Bryce Young there at 2. Texans select him. Mel writes for the Texans, who are in the early stages of a roster reset. They have to get the face of their franchise. Young can be that guy. No, he doesn't have the ideal size at 5'10", 204 pounds, but he's going to become the 3rd under 6-foot signal caller drafted in round 1. But turn on the tape and watch him maneuver the pocket, find passing lanes, drop dimes all over the field. He's legit. Houston just traded wideout Brandon Cooks, so Young would have similar issues to Stroud in Carolina, but the Texans have another first-rounder to keep building up their roster. So Mel Kiper, despite the fact he lied, still has Bryce Young going number 2 to the Texans in the latest mock.
If you look at a mock draft and Bryce Young is not the number 1 pick, then he's the number 2 pick. That's what it needs to be. Like, the Texans are taking Bryce Young if he's there. That's what's going to be.
I have not seen a mock since the Combine that has the Texans taking anyone other than C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young. There were some beforehand when some people were trying to place Jimmy Garoppolo in Houston or Baker Mayfield in Houston, to where it's like, oh, they'll bring one of those guys in and they'll take Will Anderson there. And there were some that had Will Levis going to the Texans and some that even had Anthony Richardson going to the Texans. But it feels like every single mock draft that I have seen since the Combine came and went has either Bryce Young or C.J. Stroud ending up here with the Texans.
Number 3 in Mel's mock draft gets me pretty excited.
Well, this is something that, Cody, you've been all over for a while on something that could happen. So quarterback at 1, quarterback at 2. At 3, we got a trade. Mel Kiper has a projected trade where the Indianapolis Colts move up 1 spot from 4 to 3. And the pick at number 3 is Will Levis, quarterback, Kentucky.
Now, the caveat exists that Steichen may be able to coach out some of the bad stuff from Levis, but I feel the most strongly about Will Levis being a bad player in the NFL of any of these quarterbacks. And so if he ends up on the Indianapolis Colts, that's a positive for me. Now, look, Steichen's a really good coach. I like him a lot. It was BK's favorite coach in the coaching cycle. So there's a chance that Steichen can fix him. But Will Levis, in my opinion, stinks and is going to stink. If the Colts end up with him and the Texans end up with Bryce Young, happy day, pizza party time. Let's go.
Pizza party.
Pizza party time.
Oh, those were the best.
How many pizzas? Full pie to the face if that happens?
Well, we got to figure out how many people are coming, but yeah, we'll make sure everybody's got enough pizza.
I'm hearing some rumblings of potentially being in Kansas City for this draft, Cody. So if that happens,
A Kansas City pizza?
little Kansas City barbecue to the face, perhaps?
Well, I mean, I can do that. I do that a couple times so that I can tell him how inferior it is to this great state's barbecue.
Very good.
It's good. That's fine. It can be good, but it's shooting for second.
It's great.
It's shooting for second.
All right. It's closer than you think.
I would love Will Levis to end up in Indianapolis because I don't believe in Will Levis.
Okay. The Colts are a huge wild card right now because I expect them to make an offer to Lamar Jackson. I do. Hadn't happened yet. I don't know when it's going to happen. I just feel like they are going to try to end up with Lamar Jackson in free agency because they have not seemed super keen on moving up to number one. We haven't heard nearly as many rumblings about the Colts actually calling the Bears to trade up to number one as I thought we would. Everybody was speculating, including me. I thought they were going to be the team that traded up to number one because I thought Jim Irsay was the most desperate to do whatever he possibly could to get the quarterback that he wanted. But it didn't happen. We haven't heard Ryan Poles come out and talk a whole bunch about the Colts making offers to move up to number one. I feel like Lamar Jackson might end up in Indy. So anything other than that, especially Will Levis ending up with the Colts, would excite me way more than that scenario. And Mel Kiper in his mock even mentions that. He says, barring a dramatic trade for Lamar Jackson, which would cost 2 first-round picks, they should move up to ensure that they get Levis. There are no reports out there that say the Colts are making an offer. This is just me speculating and trying to connect some dots and put 2 and 2 together. But I feel like they'll at least make an offer. Baltimore can match it, and that ends everything. And then the Colts will have to figure something out in the draft. But I think it's eerie that it's so quiet on the trade rumor front when it comes to the Colts right now.
Look at the rest of Mel's mock here, and you look at where the Texans are at and what players could potentially be available. At pick 12, the Houston Texans select Nolan Smith, outside linebacker from Georgia. And this is a guy that if you were into the combine, he tore it up at the NFL scouting combine. He was one of the guys that was like winners and losers from the combine. I saw this guy's name everywhere in the winners category. Tough to go wrong. It's hard to be critical of any NFL GM that picks a stud defensive player from the Georgia Bulldogs defense.
I hate the selection.
Unless you're Cody Stoots.
I hate the selection. You couldn't have set that up any more perfect for me to talk about this. Nolan Smith combined with Bryce Young, you would be drafting 2 absolute physical outliers at their position. Like Nolan Smith is a pass rusher in that he's not really a defensive end. Like this team needs a defensive end. This team needs somebody who's going to affect the opponent's rushing attack and the opponent's passing attack. And Nolan Smith's size, he's under 240 pounds, and he's 6'2". You'd be drafting 2 incredibly impressive physical outliers for both of their positions. And again, Nolan Smith's going to fit for somebody from an edge perspective, and he can get after the quarterback. But for the way we believe the Texans are going to play defense, I don't know that Nolan Smith would be the correct selection here.
So you're okay with 1 physical outlier. You're not okay with 2.
That to me feels like a bit too risky. Like, look, I can acknowledge that quarterbacks are risky in general, and then I can go ahead and acknowledge that it is a risk to draft an undersized guy. And I said last year, I didn't like Kenny Pickett because I didn't believe the skills and the production in college was high enough to ignore the historical outlier that worked against him. Well, Bryce Young's got a bunch of outliers that are working against him from a size perspective. And so with that, I do believe the skill and the abilities to be good enough to ignore that. I don't with Nolan Smith, especially with some of the other players that would be available in this spot. And I would go even further. If a certain player that Kiper's mocking here starts to fall like he does, I'd be in favor of trading up. I'd call Chicago at 9 and see if they want to move back a few more spots. And I'd get Tyree Wilson, who Kiper has getting mocked, to the Tennessee Titans 1 pick before the Texans. I would trade up to 9 for him if I was the Texans.
What are you giving up? A third?
I would give up one of the third-round picks.
That probably eliminates your chances of trading back into the first round and ending up with 3 firsts.
But I'm leaving with what I believe to be the number 1 quarterback and the number 2 pass rusher in the draft, and I'd be fine with that.
Okay. I'm cool with Nolan Smith. He's got to put on weight. He has to put on weight. He can't be playing at 238. But I like the potential. I like what he brings to the table. funny thing is, you look at that guy and you look at his size, you would think, well, he's probably really good as a pass rusher, but he just gets bulldozed when trying to defend the run. No, he's actually a better run defender than he is pass rusher right now. My main concern with Nolan Smith is he doesn't have a good enough repertoire of pass rush moves to win on a regular basis. Like he couldn't win regularly at Georgia. He had 7.5 total sacks the last couple of years. Now, he put up better numbers than Trayvon Walker, who ended up going number 1 overall last year to Jacksonville, but the production wasn't exactly where I wanted it to be with Nolan Smith. He also gets hurt a little bit. That's kind of the physical outlier conversation that you brought up, Cody, with Bryce Young. Well, people are worried about Bryce Young because of his size. Could he get hurt more than the average player at his position? And Nolan Smith missed half the season last year with the torn pec. He also missed 4 games in 2021. So it's back-to-back seasons where Nolan Smith hasn't been healthy, and I feel like Texans fans are a little bit scared to draft a player with injury history after what just happened with Derek Stingley Jr. in his first season. So I'd be okay with it because I would be fascinated to see how DeMeco Ryans could use this guy. Because of his ridiculous combination of strength and speed, this guy would be a beast in coverage. You're not drafting him to be a defensive back or anything like that, but you could kind of line him up in a number of different spots, and I think he could help your team out. He's not going to be Micah Parsons, so don't get that thought in your head, but he's the type of guy who could play a couple of different spots on the field, similarly to what Micah Parsons did with the Cowboys. Like there's some excitement with Nolan Smith right there. So, yeah, he's got to work on the pass rush. He's got to put on a few pounds. There's no way he can play at 238 going up against tackles in the NFL and expect to win relatively consistently. But, man, if DeMeco Ryans trusts him and believes that there's something to work with there, you talk about a piece of clay that you can mold into something special. That's Nolan Smith right there. I wouldn't hate the pick.
Well, let me tell you why he makes sense for the Texans. Plays in the SEC, is injury-prone, and he's kind of that outlier. Nick Caserio, smartest guy in the room. Small sample size, but that's been kind of some of the track record of his picks. So I don't think that would scare off Caserio for making the pick. And then also this aspect. Mel Kiper writes, Smith, who tore his right pectoral muscle in November and missed the rest of the season, could be a foundational player for Coach DeMeco Ryans, who's going to mold the defense in his own image. And then Mel, in the draft report here, talks about how people around the league rave about Smith's leadership skills. Doesn't that kind of feel like a Texan guy? Leadership skills off the charts. SEC, played at Georgia, DeMeco's guy. I could definitely see this being a pick the Texans would make at 12.
If the board falls the way Kiper has it falling, just draft Jackson Smith and Jigba. Just you'll go get the wide receiver, figure out the defensive end later.
So there's no defensive end outside of Will Anderson and Tyree Wilson that you're comfortable with the Texans taking at 12?
Oh, no, I'd be comfortable with the Van Monster.
Okay, he's going to 15, so would you rather them take him at 12?
I like Jackson Smith and Jigba more than Lucas Van Ness.
By the way, Mel has Jackson Smith and Jigba at 20 for the Seahawks. That is the first wide receiver off the board.
Yeah, my preference list at 12 is, if one of these defensive ends over the next few weeks, it kind of feels like, actually I'm thinking about it more. The wide receiver situation is going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be as drastic as it was last year, so there may be some more guys available, or I turn up to find that I really like some of these other wide receivers a little bit more than I initially thought. But to me, there's only one first-round wide receiver. There's multiple first-round defensive ends, and Jackson Smith and Jigba at 12 to me would be the move if this board falls the way Kiper has put it.